it gets adulterated a little bit that way. But now keep in mind, Bruce Lee was developing this. So it attacked kind of the traditional hierarchy of the martial arts. That you had to do things that, we talked about the more traditional way of learning martial arts, right? And following the directions and imitating and not asking a lot of questions, but learning through mimicry, right? And that you were supposed to figure it out on yourself, but then, right? So, but it was very rigid in its methodology, right? So Bruce Lee was, you should challenge the forms and all that wasn't, and a lot of what he said was considered, kind of groundbreaking or revolutionary to traditional martial arts. Truth be told, a lot of what he said, it's not like he's the first to say any of it. Being that he was a movie star, people really heard it for the first time when he said it and things like that. And that's not to take away, he was certainly a visionary. He was certainly a pretty interesting martial arts mind and an amazing practitioner. But like I said, a lot of what he wasn't. It was the way he packaged it necessarily, and versus all this that was completely new. Although he did do some pretty neat things. We'll talk about that in a minute. But basically, so he adapted from different places, right? And so within that context, depending on the person, any punch in any martial art could be your Jeet Kune Do, or there's no punch, a single punch or single kick in the martial arts that is guaranteed to be your Jeet Kune Do, right? Because Jeet Kune Do is, again, it's up to the individual, right? What works for you, what doesn't work for you, right? Reject what is useless, adopt what's useful, reject what's useless, okay? Keep in mind also, he's doing this in the 60s and the 70s when there's kind of the movement against authoritarianism and government and the hippies and everything else, and kind of society, right? His message in the martial arts is echoing the society of certain people in the sentiment of certain people in society anyway. Again, rejecting authority or hierarchy and things like that, right? So, sometimes what makes somebody important in history is just the luck of the timing of when he's doing it, right? Other people have been saying it, centuries later, but again, it didn't catch on. It didn't go viral, so to speak, at that time and period or whatever, right? So, and Bruce Lee at the time, that helped a lot, okay? Is that time in history where he was, okay? But like I said, any punch or kick could be Jeet Kune Do or it could not be Jeet Kune Do based on your own personal philosophy, okay? Now, Jun Fan is more a set curriculum of techniques that Bruce Lee taught, usually from like 1963, 64 to then when he died in 73, okay? And that Wing Chun is that Jun Fan is his expression of Jeet Kune Do, right? This is what worked for Bruce Lee. Now, because Bruce Lee was Bruce Lee, a lot of people want to study that, okay? And do what he did, because what he did worked so good for him. The question, of course, and very valid, is, well, okay, is it how much of it is because it's good technique and how much of it is just because Bruce could do it because Bruce Lee was Bruce Lee, right? For example, Bruce Lee put an emphasis on the lead hand being the dominant hand. Most everybody puts your backhand being your strong hand, your power hand, and put more of an emphasis on the backhand. Bruce Lee put much more of an emphasis on the front hand. He was so fast, and with that speed came excessive power that most people don't have in their front hand, right? So, again, is it realistic for us all to use our front hands the same way Bruce Lee did if we don't have the same ability that Bruce Lee did to make it work, right? Like the same thing we talked about when we're talking about sport with like Taekwondo. If I'm not, I wouldn't recommend for self-defense, most of us try kick, a spinning kick to the head, right? We're gonna keep it simple, kick to the groin, kick to the knee, whatever else. If you're an Olympic Taekwondo player and I can backspin kick you upside the head probably faster than you can react to it, well then yeah, it doesn't matter. It's gonna work great. Okay? See the point, right? How much of this was just because it was Bruce Lee? But because again, Bruce Lee was Bruce Lee, a lot of people want to learn his Jeet Kune Do, which is Bruce Lee Kung Fu. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, what was Jun Fan? It was originally Bruce Lee studied the Chinese martial art of Wing Chun. So there's a strong Wing Chun base to it. Okay. Wing Chun, very triangle based, and is a trapping martial art. And what we mean by that is you basically immobilize the other person's arms and create opportunities to hit or whatever. There are two key concepts. Number one is the concept of mother line, this line right down the center of our nose. Okay? I want to protect mine, and I want to basically attack or control his. Okay? Whoever controls basically this mother line between us typically controls the fight. Okay? So this center line, okay? All attack, and so we want to control that. And again, there's the trapping where I create a barrier and then I trap this barrier so that then I go around and immobilize a hand so they can't use it, right? And then, so as a rule then, Wing Chun tends to be a little more close range. Okay? So we'll do some trapping out there, okay? A lot of you'll see in martial arts movies the wooden dummy, just the post with a couple of arms sticking out, right? And you'll see the guys and they'll come up and they'll do their tan sao, and then they'll hit it, they'll be smacking the arms, and then they'll punch the body of the wooden trunk. You guys see that in a martial arts movie or something like that, right? So that's Wing Chun. They're practicing blocking and controlling a limb and then punching back, right? And they're practicing those types of movements. And then again, get a little conditioning on the hands and stuff while they're doing it too, okay? But this is Wing Chun, okay? Bruce Lee did adapt a few things. He adapted the trapping a little bit more, okay? He approached trapping, as we said, is as a rule a little more in close type of fighting. I do my trapping in here, right? So for me to be able to like control the other person's arms, I have to be pretty close to him to be able to do that, right? Versus being out here and throwing big bombs, like big punches, I can't control their arms from over there, okay? So Bruce Lee flushed out or rounded out Jun Fan to include the other ranges, okay? He took kicks for kicking range. Now what's unique about his kicks is they, excuse me, are very pendulum based, okay, or momentum based. So what I mean is, we're here, there's no snap to them. Like, so all of us those of you guys who have done sliding kicks before, right, we slide up, right, and we slide back, we have that pendulum motion, right? I took that warm up from basically Jun Fan, Jeet Kune Do, right? Of course, we still want to add the snap to it, okay? And we still snap the leg. Jun Fan keeps the leg bent. They just use the momentum of that pendulum to do the kick. It's all the momentum of that pendulum. There is no snap of the leg, okay, as they do it, okay? He took punching and Western boxing techniques, okay, and used a lot of Western boxing techniques for the more longer range. So we have the long range kicking techniques. We have then the striking, the boxing techniques, the hand techniques, okay? As I mentioned before, the one unique adaptation about that is, as a rule, most people, I'm left-handed, so most people in traditional boxing, then I would be a southpaw, I would put my strong hand back. I want my strong hand back because that's my power hand, whatever. Jun Fan puts their strong side forward, okay? Because he used a lot more back fist jabs type things off the front hand because of his speed or whatever. So he put his strong hand forward. So that's very different than traditional boxing, okay? Then you got a little closer, you got your trapping range, and then you get into your grappling, standing grappling, ground grappling, whatever, okay? And again, Bruce Lee did all those. So again, he borrowed from different places. The footwork comes more from boxing and fencing. His brother was actually a world-class fencer. And if you look at, if you look at a lot of the series, like, okay, this is a different, this is a series of, he did this and this and this combination. I mean, you can find where he drew inspiration for a lot. Some of these are like, again, I mentioned before that the military had kind of boxing manuals, right? Their combatives manuals had a lot of boxing to it or whatever. So a lot of his boxing or combinations, I mean, you kind of like, wow, those like line up pretty darn well. Those are pretty close, okay? After he died, a lot of his notes were compiled and were put together and said, oh, this is, so this is the writings and the minds or whatever. He was greatly influenced by fencing. If you look at his notes that's in that book, he uses the term riposte, which is a very fencing term for return, okay? But a lot of what, there's a lot of, I wouldn't say it's plagiarism, because keep in mind, this was published after he died, right? So if I took notes on something, right, I took notes on a book I read or I studied or whatever, and I had my own series of notes with it, someone comes by and publishes it as mine, I mean, they were just my notes. I didn't say I was publishing it as mine, right? But people did. But like basically they are fencing manual type concepts and things like that, okay? So he borrowed a lot of fencing concepts, boxing concepts. Again, used the lead hand a lot more effectively for power shots. So flushed out all the different types of ranges in his art. So he did a lot of different things, or did modify and change a lot of his arts that he drew influence from to kind of make it his kind of cohesive whole, right? So that is Jun Fan JKD. But I would like for you to appreciate that there is a difference. Jun Fan is Bruce Lee's Kung Fu, right? My JKD expression is not Jun Fan. Some of it might be, I might use some of his, but then there's a lot of other stuff that is not, okay? But my style is not the same expression, okay? All right, so we'll do, again, some trapping over here next door in just a minute, okay? And then lastly, we'll talk about karate today. All right. So when we talk about karate, karate is actually a pretty generic term for those arts that developed in Okinawa. Okay? From 1740 on, the Okinawan island banned weapons. So as tradition has it, the empty hand arts flourished. There's a lot of traffic between Okinawa and China, right? China's up here, Okinawa's a little island down here, Japan's over here, right? So there's a lot of exchange. There's a strong Chinese, both commerce, but then people moving or coming back and forth from China and stuff like that. So many styles developed. Okay, it was originally called just te or tode, and which means te basically is hand, okay, or sometimes tang te. Tang te is the same as in Tang Sudo, the Korean martial art, the one that Chuck Norris did. Okay, is kind of a lot like Taekwondo. Tang refers to the Tang Dynasty in China. Okay, so basically it means Chinese hand, is what it means. Okay, that's going to become important in a minute. Okay, but basically, generally speaking, there were a lot of, again, there's a lot of exchange from China. It is speculated that most of the original Okinawan karate was basically styles that came from southern China. People from Okinawa, either there's a couple key figures that maybe went to Okinawa, studied from Okinawa to southern China, studied martial arts there for a long time, came back to Okinawa, started teaching whatever else, or again came back. So there's a lot of southern Chinese martial arts influence in the origin of karate. Okay, and then karate started doing again kind of its own thing or whatever. There are various different styles or schools of karate. There is Shorin-ryu, which claims a link to the Shaolin Temple. Okay, there's Shuri, which Shuri is the Shuri Castle, which is in Okinawa. Everybody heard that Notre Dame burned down, right, last year, and that was a horrific thing. Shuri Castle, also like a 500-year-old castle, burned in Okinawa, and that was, I mean, what Notre Dame meant for Catholicism. Shuri Castle probably meant more for karate in terms of just I don't know, historical symbolism and things like that. Okay, it was a real shame. There was Shuri-ryu. So there are different styles of Okinawan karate. Okay, and again, sometimes it was called just te. Old school was called te, or whatever else. Okay. As tradition has it, Okinawa eventually became part of Japan and subservient of Japan. It was not very well received or respected. I joke, but I don't. Okinawa was kind of considered the Kentucky of Japan, right? It was. I joke, but I don't, right? It was considered very backward, hillbilly, redneck, whatever. It was not very sophisticated, not very advanced or whatever. It was again part of Japan, but it was not nothing really good could come from it either, right? That type of thing, man, I don't know, maybe good sushi or something, but nothing. Nothing of cultural significance and things like that. Okay, but like for example, as tradition has it, when they are conscripting Okinawan people for the Japanese army, they looked around and all these Okinawans were like, these guys are really, they're really strong. They've got strong bodies. They're really explosive. They're really athletic. What's going on? I mean, these guys are better specimens than our soldiers. What's going? And I guess they did karate, right? So it was recognized that karate had some health benefits and things like that. The one that I want to focus on is Shotokan karate and Gichin Funakoshi. Shotokan and Gishin Funakoshi. Funakoshi is a school teacher in Okinawa, very traditional, but is kind of a scholar. A lot of the other karate masters maybe not viewed as necessarily, how should we say, very intellectual. Good fighters, good brawlers, but maybe not, and not necessarily bad men. Maybe high character men, but maybe not necessarily the most scholarly. Okay, Funakoshi is the one to go to and take karate to Japan. Okay. He is the founder of modern day Karate Do, okay? But he also his style is called Shotokan Karate, okay? And he is the first to term Karate Do. He added the Do suffix to karate when he went to Japan, okay? Now, you could say, remember we talked about what the Do suffix means. We took it from a Jitsu system to a Do system, right? We part the emphasis on the betterment of the person, the benefits that martial arts can teach us besides just the fighting and things like that. That is the emphasis, right? So if you read Funakoshi's work, he is very much all about that. He's all about how karate can improve your character. In fact, one of his lines that we quote a lot is, the ultimate aim of karate lies not in victory or defeat, but the moral development of its participants. Okay, right? Or development of its character, of its participants. Okay, right? So he's big about that. Okay, so it certainly represents his philosophy about karate. Okay, but the cynic can also make the point that this is a very shrewd move. Okay, so Funakoshi goes to Japan, wants to get karate accepted as a martial art, viewed on par with all the other martial arts that are part of the Japanese kingdom. Okay? But they have jiu-jitsu and judo, they have kendo, they have sumo, they have a proud martial heritage already in Japan, and Okinawa is this backwater. What guys, we conquered you. How can your fighting be that good? Right? So he changes, or he adopts a lot of things to make karate more in line with the other Japanese martial arts. Adding the do, so now there's karate do, just like there's judo, just like there's kendo, is one way. Okay? We start wearing uniforms like judo people do. Okay? The gis, which we call dobokes in Korean martial arts, but still, right? They didn't do that in Okinawa. A lot of times they would just practice. There weren't training halls. There were a few training halls, but originally, basically, people practiced in their loincloths in people's backyards. Okay? Something like that. Okay? So, the belt system, all that, he adopts these Japanese systems he adopts those systems to karate. He changes the name to do. He also changes the name even more, and I'll talk about that in a minute. There's some speculation that, like your Kia, our karate yell, we do them in sword arts, there are other martial arts. That was a more modern. Now keep in mind, originally in Okinawa, karate was kind of practiced in secrecy. Right? Funakoshi talks about working all day, then going and practicing all night long, from 2 to 4 a.m. or 12 to 4 a.m. at his master's house under the cover of darkness. Okay? So if you're practicing in secret in someone's backyard or late at night, do you think you're screaming as you're doing that? What's going on over there, right? People are calling the cops, right? Someone's getting murdered over there. What's going on in the neighbor's house type stuff, right? So you're not doing that. You go to Japan, now you get, the idea of what martial arts looks like is battle cry, sword, kendo, do, right? Attacking and yelling and screaming. Well, all the other cool martial arts are screaming. How come we're not screaming? Okay, right? So even I'm not saying there wasn't a kiat before, but like even maybe perhaps that. Some of the regimented, some of the, what we do in Taekwondo, kind of the very quasi-military regimented aspect comes from kind of that Japanese influence as well, okay? So there's a very big gulf between original Okinawan karate and the Japanized, right? The version that has underwent influence in Japan, okay? But that also is what allowed karate to become accepted in Japan and then subsequently around the world, right? And spread it around the world. A lot of that is owed to Gichin Funakoshi. Now, he also is credited with changing the name. Karate, the ideograms, that the symbols that are pronounced karate, today we talked about means hand, okay? He changed the symbol. It is still pronounced the same way, right? But it is spelled differently. It's a different symbol. Karate, like Tang, originally meant Chinese hand. And he changed it to mean empty hand. So he changed the spelling. It was still pronounced karate, but he changed the spelling. So if you looked at it, it meant, instead of meaning Chinese hand, it meant empty hand. And again, from a philosophical standpoint, the idea of becoming an empty vessel, being able to be humble and learn and be able to grow as a person and things like that. So empty hand just doesn't mean I don't have a weapon in my hand, right? It was even more philosophical than that, okay? And if you read his writings and everything else, Funakoshi was very much about that, okay? But it was also kind of a, for lack of a better term, political move. It was a shrewd move. If you want Okinawan karate to be accepted on the mainland of Japan, calling it something Chinese isn't probably going to help, is it? Okay? Especially at this time period when Chinese, again, China was the weakest nation in Asia. Okay? So this is not that's not a selling point. Okay? So again, the cynic could say it was for practical purposes, although it was also very philosophical. Okay? But again, Funakoshi owes a lot. And this ties into our Taekwondo lineage, because we talked about last week, Funakoshi is who the founder of the Chundaquan Longbook Lee studied under. Okay? Changed Shotokan, Pine Wave, to Blue Wave. We talked about that last week a little bit. Okay? There are other styles or schools of karate out there, like I said. Okay? Another important one is Goju-Ryu Karate, founded by Chojun Miyagi. That name should be familiar with you, shouldn't you? At least the last name. Okay? The writer of The Karate Kid was a 5th degree black belt in Goju-Ryu Karate. So not only did he write a good message, he picked good names for his characters. Okay? Again, Miyagi is a strong karate name. Some of the ones in Karate Kid too, right? He was very deliberate in some of the names he used. Okay, Goju-Ryu is noted for being much more circular and a little softer than a lot of your other styles of karate. Okay, so because there are a lot of different styles, sometimes it's hard to distinguish between them or make generic conversation about the different styles. Okay, generally speaking, the Okinawan styles that were a little more focused on fighting were the stances were much more upright, okay, more mobile. Your deep karate training stances, where we're working on either A, sport, or B, just strength and development and flexibility, right? Those are typically nowadays more associated more with kind of the Japanese version of karate, okay? Or then the influence, for example, Taekwondo, that was influenced by that, okay? Everybody has some circular and some linear styles, some are a little more circular than others, okay? They have some kicks, but maybe not necessarily as many as like certainly Taekwondo or whatever, okay? A lot of them have a lot of different types of, there are some unique fist positions, so like for example, punching with one knuckle, so all the force goes in one knuckle, or actually punching with the thumb. There are some unique hand positions that are created, of course the spear, right, that spearing and poking versus punching. And so now all of that is conditioned. The other thing is the maxim that you hear a lot in karate is this concept of one punch, one kill. Okay? So a lot of times there is a lot more, especially in these deep stance, big step stance karate, there is very strong commitment to like 100% power in that punch. Okay? It's not very mobile. There is not a fluidity there. Like, so other martial arts, we talk about fluidity, being able to like do things in like rapid succession, right? Hit them once, hit them twice, hit them, so the first one doesn't work or whatever, I can flow, I can keep hitting them or whatever, okay? Karate kind of is like, well, if you do the first one right, that's a moot point, right? Because I'm going to drop them with the first punch because I gave everything I had to that punch. That's the general strategy. Sometimes strategy and execution don't always jive. We talked about that. But that is the basic premise, is I am going to commit everything I can to that punch. Okay? The other part to that is that it also requires a lot of training to develop that power, and that requires a lot of conditioning. So I talk about it in Taekwondo. One of my favorite karate quotes is, "Karate is the training of the bones." Okay? Now, so like very hard, big, heavy blocks, right? And so the idea is not that I just don't want to block, I just don't want to knock it out of the way. I want to club it and practically break your arm. So you're like, I don't want to punch them again. That hurt, right? If you read, and I talk about this in Taekwondo all the time, if you read like the accounts of all these famous masters or whatever, like it's